Hey, what's up, bookworms? We are back today with another interview with a major published author. He is the author of the Riyria universe, including Riyria Revelations, Chronicles, and Legends of the Empire, Legends of the First Empire, and much, much more. He probably needs no introduction if you clicked play on this video. You probably read something, you've seen the books somewhere. Mr. Michael J. Sullivan, thank you so much for coming on the channel. And I want to say thank you for creating maybe my favorite fantasy duo ever in Royce and Hadrian.
Oh, thank you very much. And I'm also very impressed that you did your homework because you can pronounce Riyria correctly, or at any rate, as I do. So,
I actually cheated. It was a long time ago when I first started reading this, and not really that long ago. It was like last year. I actually did message you and ask, what is the right way to pronounce this? Because I was saying Riyria, and people were telling me, dude, that's wrong. You can't be saying that. So I was like, well, how do you say it? So I've heard, I don't say the ya, right? It's Riyria, but if you say I'm saying it right, then I'm going to stick with Riyria.
Riyria is the way that I pronounce it. And I actually put a lot of effort in trying to get the pronunciation of this right when I invented the word. I actually had a focus group with my teenage daughter and her friends to see how they would pronounce it. And then I ran it through the computer to see how it would pronounce it. So it's just interesting because sometimes I make the word just because I like the way it looks.
Right.
But I also wanted it to sound, halfway decent. So there was some work behind that. But the wonderful thing is nowadays when there's audiobooks, it's great because otherwise no one would, people would pronounce it any way they want to. I remember I used to always say Sauron for the Dark Lord in Lord of the Rings, but apparently it was Sauron, is how Tolkien would have said it. So it's kind of fun. Now that we have audiobooks, that gets cleared up.
Yeah, when I went and saw the second Hobbit movie, I'm like, son of a gun, I've been saying Smaug wrong all these years. It's Smaug. How about that? Well, I'm still going to say Smaug. Well, when the channel was in the infancy, I think I had just really started, and I had just started reading Theft of Swords, and you were the very first author who ever actually watched one of these reviews and actually commented and said, hey, when you finish up, let's have a talk. So first, I want to say thank you for that. Now that the channel's gotten much, much bigger. But second, I apologize it's taken this long. I've kind of looked at these books as almost like comfort food, so to speak. And that's a compliment, trust me, in a way where I'll be reading I really have a lot of grim, dark fantasy, really just heavy themes, adult fantasy. And every once in a while, it's nice to just go back to a world that doesn't feel just completely bleak and hopeless. And I do appreciate that. So that's why I've kind of spread it out over the last year and a half. And but again, thank you for reaching out when you did.
I tend to think of it more along the lines of the types of films that you like to watch over and over again, just because they're just enjoyable. And some of the really great films have those kind of uncomfortable parts where it's like, yeah, you got to work through them. But then you have things like Princess Bride or Galaxy Quest that are they're just fun to sit and watch, and you're just going to have a good time. So I get that impression from a lot of people that at least with the original Riyria Revelations, that they tend to see it as this very comfortable, enjoyable read that they always can go back to, and they're never going to be feeling uncomfortable at any point, because it tends to work out with it nicely.
Funny you bring that up, because when I did my review for Crown Conspiracy, I said that it made me really think of a Princess Bride kind of adventure, and that's a heck of a compliment. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I think I could probably put that movie on mute and quote the whole thing, but most of us probably can't at this point. But guys, this is going to be non-spoilers, so don't worry if you haven't read yet, because I want more people to discover this series, because I've gotten a lot of people on board, but I feel like I can get much, much more headed that way. So before we get going, let me fanboy for a second. Like I said, I didn't know that this was the kind of fantasy that I needed. Again, it was just kind of the straight to the meat potatoes without kind of sacrificing characters, just to build up the world. There's so much fantasy, I think, right now in modern fantasy where they spend so much time just kind of flexing their prose muscles. Not that there's anything wrong with their prose at all, but you know what I mean? But just so much just exposition to a point where it's like, okay, I feel like I should be taking notes because I feel like I'm in history class now. So I was saying it kind of took me back to almost like my reading Shannara for the first time, Terry Brooks back in the day when I was younger, just like, okay, this is something I can grasp and not feel like, okay, it's time to put on the learning goggles here and really just go to school. So I want to say I appreciate you doing that. And I know that that's something apparently that you have aimed for, correct?
That's correct. Yes. When I read, of course, Lord of the Rings, and I read Terry, and then I just kind of stopped reading fantasy for a long time, because I found that whenever I picked up fantasy, particularly when I started writing these books, I went to a bookstore and I picked up books, and they all started the same way. And it was this, what I called a wall of noise, because it's just gobbledygook when you start reading, because it takes you a long time to learn the fantasy world before you can get into it. And in the old days, in the 70s, what they used to do, the 1970s, by the way, I don't know how dated I am. They used to actually have, like prologues in which they explain the whole world. Like if you've ever seen the movie Lord of the Rings, you'll see that they have that voiceover in the very beginning that Kate Blanchett does, where she explains everything. It's actually the second chapter in Lord of the Rings, but it's literally this info dump that explains the whole world. And that's how things were handled. So you had to learn the world and before you could expect to enjoy this plot. And I've never liked that. And I didn't care for the books that were out at the time, because I would read these things. I'm like, I have to slog through, I don't know, 100, 200 pages before it even starts making sense to me. And I didn't like that. So I tried to figure out a way to integrate it. And one of the things I did was I used existing, what people call tropes, which is like knights and castles and kings and elves and dwarves. And the reason I did that was because I didn't have to explain it to anyone. I didn't have to redefine and say, okay, so this is what this is. It's really just a variation off of what's already been done, but I've given it a new name. So you have to explain it. But by not having to deal with that, then the reader already has an understanding of what those things are. I don't have to explain a knight or a sword. So when you get into the story, you get into it quicker and you can jump into the characters. And usually my intention is to get you into the story within the first page or two.
Well, I think you did a great job at that. And I think that's why most of the people that are going to be watching this are here. Now, I'd said before, most of these interviews, you get a lot of the same boring questions, hey, what was the first fantasy book you read? Stuff like that. What I like to do always is open this up to my viewers and let them ask questions. So I have a list of them here I'm going to kind of run through, but I'm going to go first because it's my channel, so I get to do that. The biggest question I think I personally would have for you is it takes a lot of courage, I think, to leave a huge publisher such as Orbit and go out on your own, but you've found like huge success. You've kind of made the blueprint for doing this, everything through a Kickstarter. I see you fund something with Kickstarter in like 6 minutes, almost everything. How did you make this decision, and was it scary?
Actually, the scarier decision originally was going with Orbit.
Really? Okay.
I started off, most people think I've started off as self-publishing. I actually didn't. I started off with a traditional publisher in Minnesota. They couldn't afford to do the second book because they had financial problems. But so I did then self-publish the first 5 books of the series. And when the 5th book hit, I was making a lot of money. In fact, I would talk to traditional authors that I knew, and they were like, you're making what? Because they were making nowhere near that. And they couldn't believe it. So people would say, well, why would you ever go traditional? Because I literally made a calculation and figured I would lose about $250,000 if I went with Orbit, because I was making so much more on my own. So my wife said, like, what are you doing? I said, so I don't care that I'm going to be losing $250,000. And she's like, what do you mean you don't care? You're losing $250,000. And I said, where point me to the store that I can go to where I can pay $250,000 and as a result triple my fan base or my readership and essentially expand my readership like that and raise my brand awareness. And she was like, okay, yeah, sure, I get that. And I thought I was going to lose a lot of money, but it turned out that when you go with the major publisher, it actually opens doors overseas. So I actually recouped a lot of the money that I would have lost otherwise by going into 14 different languages. So that was kind of a benefit. But you're a little off on your information here. So I went to Orbit, which is the subsidiary of Hachette. And then I went from there to Del Rey, which is a subsidiary of Penguin Random House, which is actually a bigger publisher, if not those books, but if you're looking at the Legend of the First Empire. So the Legend of the First Empire were Del Rey. And the reason I went with them was I wanted my next release to be hardcover to mass market. And Orbit wasn't willing to do that, so we shifted over. So I went from like the second biggest publisher, I went from self-publishing to the second biggest publisher to the biggest publisher. And then because of, it really wasn't me just saying, I want to go on my own. There was a problem. And the problem was that I had pre-sold my audio rights to Audible. I think it was Audible. I made them Recorder Books. My wife should be here checking me, but I think it was Audible. And as a result of that, it was no problem for the first 4 books with Del Rey, but the problem came in halfway through the production of that series when corporate at Random House said, from now on, we are not doing any more books unless we can get the audio rights, which makes a lot of sense because the audio rights were worth to me twice what the contract that they were going to give me for all rights insofar as the print and the ebook and the audio. So there was no way I was going to be, giving them the audio rights because they couldn't afford it apparently. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that I had already sold them, so it didn't make a difference. So they said they loved us, we loved them. I had no problem with them whatsoever. They treated me very well, but they couldn't pick up the last books because I'd already sold the audio rights. So that's when I started self-publishing again, because at that point I wasn't going to be giving up audio rights anymore. And since that seems to be a kind of a consistent thing that all publishers have picked up on, I'm back to where I was before. But you're right, the Kickstarters and other promotions have done very well. And yeah, I think we did fund our Kickstarter in like 6 minutes.
I've heard you've been kind of encouraging some other authors to try this. Have you gotten anybody else on board with the Kickstarter movement yet?
Let's see. I'm not sure. Hey, Rob, did we get anyone else to do a Kickstarter? Who else?
So Dirk started doing.
Oh yeah, Dirk Ashton, if you know him, he recently did a Kickstarter. Who else?
And Patrick Benedict.
Patrick Benedict, yeah. So we have gotten. So originally, when I started doing this, I did the Kickstarter because there was a number of authors. This is my wife, by the way, who just passed by the camera.
Hi.
I'm going to say him because I've been working at a church we bought.
This is a typical interview.
And,
so
it's okay. I told my kids if they wanted to come in and say hi or good night, it just happens. I mean, it's only a major published author. No big deal.
So what?
And Sean Speakman.
Sean Speakman, yes, you may know
Terry
him.
Brooks.
And Terry Brooks. You obviously heard of Terry.
Heard of him a little bit, yeah.
Yes, Sean is Terry's web guy, and he
does signed books, right? Yeah. Signed page.
So what originally occurred there was we had met a lot of authors who had gotten partway through their series and they weren't doing that well, so their publisher dropped them and they were very upset. And we said, well, you could always self-publish, because at this time, of course, I knew how to do that. And they said, no, we can't do that because to do the job right, we'd require all this money. I said, we'll do a Kickstarter. And they said, no, it won't work. So to prove them wrong, I actually Kickstarted my first science fiction novel, which was Hollow World, just to kind of prove them wrong. And I think what did we have that? It was 30,000. What was it was 6,000 that we aimed for.
Yeah. I can't remember all the breakdown. I think we made.
She knows all the numbers.
Yeah, now I can't do it. I think we made about $60,000 on Hollow World.
But
all together.
But we asked.
Oh yeah, we only asked.
We asked for like 3,000 or 6,000, and because I think what it was is we asked for 3,000. We were going to kick in 3,000 together. We estimated it would cost 6,000 to produce that book, but we ended up getting like 30 some odd thousand. So that's when it proved that it worked. And so then we went back and talked to other authors and said, hey, this system works.
So we've done several Kickstarters now, and our total income from Kickstarters is about $960,000.
Wow.
So it's just shy of $1 million. When we do our next Kickstarter, we'll go over $1 million in Kickstarter funding.
Yeah, we're a little disappointed because we were ranking it like we had the top really we held some of the top spots in the top 10.
Third and fourth.
But now Brandon Sanderson got involved. And he blew the doors off everything. And there was a couple other people who jumped in. So yeah, actually our pushing other people to do it is not so cool because we're dropping in the ranks.
Right. All right, let's get into some of these viewer questions here. How would you describe Riyria to a complete beginner considering getting into the book? Say a 30-second elevator pitch. And I know you've probably done this a million times.
Well, obviously the one that stands out is, unlikely heroes in an adventure. But no, it's two guys that are kind of like opposites who go off to steal a sword because they're hired to do it. And when they find the sword, they find the body of the dead king, and they've suddenly realized they've been set up to take the fall. Unfortunately, they picked the wrong people for the fall because these people are And when I first conceived the idea, it really was sort of like, you know, almost like James Bond characters from the old 1950s that were, you know, they're that kind of people. They take special, like Mission Impossible, take special missions. They're not really thieves in a sense that they go around stealing from people, because that's almost too passé for them. They will do special missions and they set up for them. So that's kind of how it was kind of like this modern, you know, spy type threat, because they also spy, and so they do a number of different things, but we put it in medieval times. The other thing I would actually say for people to like it is, like you said earlier, I mean, I intentionally wrote the books simply. And the reason I did that is because I've always found that if you have a very simple story, then I like the prose to be more complex, because that's the way you can enrich it. But if you have a very complex story, then I like to simplify the prose to make it easier for the reader to digest this very massive idea. And what you have sitting in those top 3 books is just about 700,000 words. And that comprises a lot of information. And as you can probably tell from having read it, a lot happens in each book. It's not like, you know, some of the other novels that you might have encountered where you'll go through 300 pages and not really much happens. In mine, 300 pages is an entire novel and a lot goes on. So in order to condense that in a way that people can read it, I'd like to make it simple. I've actually taken really great words and just like sentences, as I always say, kill your darlings. I've had one like, that's a beautiful sentence. I got to get rid of that because.
Yeah. See, that's the things I couldn't handle. So what would you say were your biggest struggles to break through as a full-time author, and not just like as a hobby, you know, knowing that this is it, this is what I'm going to do? What would you say was your biggest struggle?
Convincing my wife. No, I'm not kidding. I mean, she is, I've always described her as a business genius. And I wrote for 20 years and didn't really get anywhere. And when I finished this series, I knew I had written something fantastic, and no one had really read it. And I became very depressed when I finished it. It was just like, I mean, I had written what I thought was this really fantastic thing that I thought, I mean, this is great. And I knew it was going to go in a drawer and no one would ever see it again. So my wife noticed I was depressed, and she says, you know, what's wrong? And I said, nothing. She's like, no, what? Come on, what's wrong? I'm like, no, it's nothing. She says, what? And I said, well, you know, I finished that 6-book series after working on it for 5-6 years, and it's really good. And I'm kind of depressed that no one's ever going to read it. She's like, oh, that's okay. I'll read it, honey. Which, of course, I assumed was, yeah, whatever. So, but she read it, and as she read it, she got more and more into it until finally when she got the last book, she actually took time off work, which she never would do for any other reason. And she was really into the books. So when she got there reading it, she made it her dedicated, you know, quest to get me published. So as a result of that, she became the driving force in getting me published at that point. And it was really fun because this thing that I used to steal away and write, you know, when I should have been doing important things, suddenly became something that, at least in her eyes, is like, oh no, you go ahead, you go right now, because that's a good thing.
Yeah. No, that's like having just a built-in alpha reader right there. That's a great business plan.
She's my alpha reader. She's also my editor, my publicist, my liaison between me and my agents and publishers. And yeah, pretty much I'm thinking that most people who deal with me don't think I exist because they all work through her.
Okay, well, with your writing process, you do write. Now, I know you did this with the original, but for those who don't know, you do write the entire series before you start releasing it. So you know you have your kind of plan beginning, middle, and end. Is this something that you do with all your series, or is that just with Revelations?
Well, obviously I did it with Revelation because I had no intention to publish it, because that was just for me, because I had given up the idea of publishing because I knew it was never going to happen. I just became very depressed as a result of it. But I liked writing, so I just went back and wrote, and I wasn't going to publish it. So yeah, I completed that whole thing before my wife read the whole thing, and when she read it, she started publishing it. So yeah, but the thing I learned in the process of doing that was, wow, because I got to where you are probably in your reading. I'll try not to spoil it for you, but there were certain things that I realized at the end, and I went, oh my God, that would be so cool if I could just change that. Oh wait, I can. No one else has read this yet. So I would go back into the older books and make changes, drop in characters, alter dialogue, so that when you got to that 5th book or 6th book, it all made sense. So when I got to my second series, which would be Legends of the First Empire, I did the same thing, because I wasn't going to allow myself to get in a situation where I had no idea where I was going and then get stuck. I don't know how J.K. Rowling's managed to do it, where she published a book and put it out and published a book and put it out. Because so often I'll be writing a book and I'm like going, wow, I really love, oh, wow, I said that, didn't I? There's actually a funny thing where I had a character in Wintertide that you just recently read where Hadrian talks to a character and he says he's never met this character before. But in the Chronicles, which is the prequels, I actually wanted him to meet that character, but I went, oh my God, he can't, because I've already said he didn't.
Right.
And that was depressing. So I had to totally redesign that book in order to accommodate that error that I had put in. So yeah, I don't like getting myself tied up so that I can't do the best book I can. So as a result of that, I do write the whole thing. But the way I do that is I'm way ahead of the publication schedule.
And that's
so,
how you manage to put out 2 books a year?
Well, yeah. I mean, it takes me about 6 months or less. I mean, the fastest one I ever did was Death of Dual Gath. It took me 68 days, but that was under pressure. Usually I like to take about 6 months to write a book. And usually I do it I start conceptualizing in September. I write in earnest over the winter months, and usually by April, May, I'm done with it. And I'm slowing down as I get older. But I can do them quickly, but I try not to, because it's, you know, I've noticed that if I ruminate more on the story and I think about it more, the story is richer and it works out much better. So I am slowing down because I think the quality is improving.
All right. What would you say is the most difficult part of your writing process, as in like how much research do you put in before you actually put pen to page?
Well, it's kind of weird. My research usually is not so much looking things up, although I do that. But a lot of it is just me thinking about the story. I build things mostly out of my imagination. When I encounter something, it's funny, recently someone was asking me if I was in engineering or construction. And prior to that, people asked me if I was a martial artist, or how long have I been using swords, or how long have I been producing wool, or how long have I been an artist painting? Because these concepts I put in the book suggests that I have that knowledge. But when I get to something like that, I will research it, and I'll go to YouTube, I'll watch films, and I'll see how it's done. Like when I'm forging a sword, I actually look up how to do that. But 90% of the time, it really is just me imagining myself where I'm at and constructing it that way. But it really is me thinking about the story, running my head through it, writing it out, realizing, oh, there's a better way of doing it, and I keep building it and building it and building it. So that's usually the pre-writing stage. And that's when I take, you know, one of these things here and I fill one of these things with notes upon notes upon notes. And then I'll go back and I'll add to it and I'll build more on it. And eventually when it gets to the point where it's just overflowing and my brain can't hold it anymore, that's when I start writing it out. So the pre-writing is, it's the scariest part, because you're just without a net. You're doing acrobatics without a net, wondering, okay, I have this whole thing and I don't know what's going to happen, but we're going to will it. So the start is always hard. It's like a plane. Getting it off the ground is hard, and landing the plane is always hard, because that's when everything has to come together. And if it doesn't come together, you're in trouble, because you just spent 6 months of your life working on something that crashes. So those are kind of the two difficult ones.
All right, you mentioned earlier about how you chose to write about like dwarves and elves because you didn't have to explain that. So that T word that I know that a lot of authors find insulting, that is tropes, obviously. The question asked here is the approach you've taken to these some of the common fantasy tropes, such as elves and dwarves. How did you go about just doing this uncanny thing and making them seem fresh and new again, though? That's something that you've been able to do that a lot of authors can't. So that's why they just don't use them.
First of all, let's begin with the word trope. I don't consider that to be a bad word. I consider it to be a necessary thing you have to do. Otherwise, if you didn't, I mean, having a spaceship in a science fiction novel is a trope. Yeah. But if you didn't have a spaceship or science, I mean, well, how would you know it was science fiction? I mean, there'd be nobody to do it. Tropes are the things that usually come up in that genre. They're not good or bad. Cliches are often confused with tropes. Cliches are things that are used so often that they've lost their value. Tropes are not. Tropes are basically the things that you need to use, because if you have no magic in a fantasy novel, if you have no swords or sorcery, it stops being fantasy. I mean, it could be set in modern day where things unusual happen, but it just might be fiction at that point. So tropes aren't bad. how did I make them fresh? I really wasn't aware that I did. When I wrote them, I didn't set out to make them fresh. What I did was I set out to write the book that I wanted to read, which was, it was more derived from television, because I was watching television shows. And on TV, I mean, there was a couple of great shows at the time that I was watching, which is Babylon 5 and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And I loved the way they took these shows that were fantasies, but they made them seem very real. And the characters seem, you know, so realistic that you really felt for them. And I noticed there was no such thing as anything like that in fantasy. The only fantasy shows I'd ever seen on television were either slapstick silly, or they took themselves so serious that it was absurd. You know, they would use very archaic language, and they would be over the top in drama. And I'm like, well, this is not what I want. What I want is an old-fashioned Errol Flynn style swashbuckling story that has like sort of like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid humor in it, but seriousness as well. I wanted a great balance of humor, fun, but also terror and sadness. And if you could put all three of those things together and you could make it readable, that's what I was aiming for. So when I looked at elves or I looked at dwarves, all I did was look at them as a different type of people. And I approached them as I would think the most realistic way I could that made it seem, you know, a believable world.
Well, I can see now why I like your books, because Babylon 5 and Buffy, that's two of my favorite shows of all time. So thanks for mentioning that. Here's a couple of off-the-wall ones, because some people do like to be different. Do you play video games? And if so, what are some of your favorites?
Right now, I'm playing Valheim, which I hope you're familiar with.
Is that a PC game?
It is, yes. I almost always play PC, but it's also on PlayStation and some other things. But yeah, it's like the #1 thing that's happening right now. And actually, I found out about it from Brian McClellan, who you may know from
Powder Mage? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Powder Mage. And he had posted on Twitter that he was playing it, and I'm like, I'll have to look this up. And sure enough, it is quite the blast to play. It's like the #1 thing on Steam. It blew up, and it's like.
I probably know what it is. I'm just not recognizing the name. But yeah.
But you know, my biggest all-time favorite probably would be EverQuest back in the days of the early 2000s. I think it started in 1999. And my wife and I played that quite extensively. But
I was afraid of becoming addicted, so I skipped it. Same with Warcraft. I was like, I don't need to lose my job over video games. So.
No, but I've played computer games since probably the early 90s. I think I started off with things like, you know, X-Wing before TIE Fighter, and, you know, Doom and all those. I mean, it was like Crusaders of the Dark Savant. These were really old games that first came out and before you even had 3D. And then, of course, you know, I moved all the way up through, you know, Half-Life and all that stuff. But Duke Nukem, yeah, Duke Nukem was the reincarnation of that in Half-Life, yeah. And so we played all those. Like right now, though, I'm really into. I mean, I liked when Minecraft came out, but I felt that was a great engine with no game. And I was waiting, because when I played Doom, I thought the same thing. Doom was a great game, or a great idea for an engine, but it wasn't a game. And I'm like, someday someone's going to take that engine and make a great game on it. And Half-Life, you know, Valve did that with Half-Life. And so when I played Minecraft, I'm like, someday someone's going to make a great game out of that. And Valheim, I think, really did that, because you can craft, you can create things, you can terraform the world, but it's also a great adventure game. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I started on DOS Word games, so that's how long I've been playing PC games here. I don't know if they mean this as like your characters or just like types of characters. They ask, what is your easiest and hardest character to write about and why? And I don't know if they mean like your particular characters or like a rogue or a thief or a, you know, I don't know what they mean. So I'll let you decide.
Well, I've been asked this before, and the answer is there isn't one. I don't have a problem writing one character or another. I enjoy writing all the characters I write. I mean, the, you know, kind of evil, sick, twisted ones are fun. The silly ones, the off-kilter ones, characters like, and people will understand this, but you won't, characters like Siri or even Wandelay, these are characters that are fun for me to write, because they're all different, but I don't really ever have a character that's more enjoyable to write or less enjoyable to write, because when I'm in their heads, I mean, it's a weird question. It's like, I can't even think of something that could relate to it, but I mean, they're all the same to me, and I enjoy all of them. So, and no one's more harder or more easier for me to write. So I don't know. It seems weird, but I can't. There's no answer to that one.
Do you have a brother? Because I can't help but think some of the banter between Royce and Hadrian is two brothers arguing.
Yes, I have a brother, but I don't think we don't talk the same way they do. No.
I'm sorry, hang on. Does buying off of your website, which I've done, does that help you more than audio or in-store? Because I know a lot of authors have told me that they make more off the audiobooks than they actually do the print. So I encourage everyone to buy off of your website. Is that the best plan of action?
That is usually the best plan of action. Yes, I will make more money because I'm not paying so much to the middlemen. To the distributor isn't involved. We literally take those books. Well, I don't. This woman does, and my daughter does. They literally put it in envelopes and they send them out to you. So there is no distributor involved if you buy from me. Also, if you buy from me, I sign everything.
Yep.
And I'm saying that with extreme sigh at this moment because I'm about to be releasing Nolan. The most current book I've got is on the press right now. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to the printer so I can sign the signatures. Signature being a section of papers that are bent and folded in such a way that they save the time and the money from it. So they will present those and I have to sign them. And I've got what, 3,500 I have to sign tomorrow. But in prep for that, I've been signing bookmarks, which people also get as part of Kickstarter. And I've probably gone through, 2,000, some of those, about 3,000 of those now.
I got a couple of those over here, I think. Yeah.
I do a lot of signing. Yeah. Didn't sign yours. I sign a lot of stuff. So, but anything you get from my site, my wife insists I sign everything because that's one of the perks of buying from me. And we do get a larger share of the money if you do go direct. But I also make an enormous amount of money off the audio because I sell a lot of those.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of feedback about the. I don't audio. I have it's years of blocking out my children. I just can't pay attention to audiobooks. But a lot of people talk about Tim Gerard Reynolds, is that his name? About how great he is with your books. So, yeah,
he's really good. You've read the books up to the point of Wintertide, is that correct?
Yes.
You remember the character of Myron?
I do.
Yeah, he reminds me of Tim. I mean, Tim is a lovable guy. He is a wonderful human being. And we've been to New York many times when he's been recording. And we will sit and he'll ask me, like, how do you pronounce this? And sometimes we can direct him if I didn't feel he got it quite right. But he almost never does. I mean, he almost gets it right every time. So, yeah, he's a wonderful narrator. And I'm in awe of what he does.
I heard you mention Butch and Sundance. So that's what I'm going to kind of think here. What were the inspirations for the characters of Royce and Hadrian?
Okay, so it's kind of weird because people ask me, I mean, there was none that I consciously know about. I didn't pattern them off of anyone or anything I know. But yeah, in retrospect, now that I've gone back and rewatched some things, yeah, Butch Cassidy Kid clearly seemed to be a subconscious influence. Also, I Spy, which was Robert Culp and Bill Cosby back in the 60s, where they played two very similar type characters. They were spies. They had this kind of, what do I call it? Like when you're talking and it was an inside jokes that they were giving that the audience didn't necessarily get. And that was okay. So they had these really kind of a fun dialogue with each other, but you could tell that they would die for each other at the same time. And that was consistent with both of those two groups. So apparently I had picked that up at some point.
And Quantum Leap.
Oh, and Quantum Leap. There's another show you probably remember.
I love it. Yeah, you're picking all the goodies here. What would you say books inspired you as a young reader? Not named Lord of the Rings, because that's the easy answer. And did any of those serve as an inspiration for your series?
Well, unfortunately, I have to rely on Lord of the Rings because that was literally the first novel I read.
We all pretty much came out of the womb with that one.
I read a book called Big Red, which was really boring. I mean, horribly boring. But I forced myself to read it so that, when I got to be 70 years old, I could hold up that book and say, look, I finished a book. See, I am proud of it. But it wasn't until I read Lord of the Rings that I actually discovered reading could be fun. Mm-hmm. And when I got done reading that, I went to the store to get another one. But this was in 1972, 73, and there weren't any.
Yeah.
Terry Brooks was still nearly a decade away from coming out with his series. There was nothing else out there. The only one who came out with anything was Ursula K. Le Guin with The Wizard of Earthsea, which came out in the kind of the mid 70s. But for years, there was nothing there. So as a 13-year-old boy, of course, I started writing my own. And I began with writing the sequel to The Lord of the Rings, which I got 25 pages into, handwritten, when I realized this is dumb. Why don't I write my own book? So I figured that out when I was 13, and I started writing novels ever since I was in like, I forget what it was, about ninth grade, I think, 8th, 9th grade. So I started writing at that point, and that's how it changed. And then, of course, my next major influence was next book I found that was good was Watership Down. And because I had read other fantasies, they didn't do much for me. Certainly back at that time, they were all kind of weird. A lot of them were military fiction. A lot of them were like The Worm Arborist, which was like, I think, translated from something in ancient, English, which was terrible, or at least certainly not good for me, because I certainly was not interested in it. So I wrote, I read Watership Down, and then actually I skewed off into other realms because my wife introduced me to this really kind of obscure writer. Lives in Maine. It's just a guy named Stephen King.
I know a little bit about him. Yeah.
Yeah, and she showed me The Stand, and I started reading that, and I got really into that.
Salem's Lot.
No, it was The Stand. It was the first one.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't get you into Salem's Lot?
No, not originally.
Oh.
So I got into that, and then that skewed me off, and I went to science fiction and read Dune and all that kind of stuff. But I really wasn't focused on fantasy for very long. There aren't a lot. I mean, I read David Eddings, his first Pawn of Prophecy, series, but I didn't really spend that much time in fantasy. I was actually reading more science fiction and kind of Stephen King-y stuff, that sort of thing. But and then it wasn't until I started giving up learning, because then I got into classics, because I was studying to learn how to write. So I was reading Steinbeck and Hemingway and Updike and Tolstoy and everything I could think of to learn how to write. And I studied those to the point where I was starting to lose interest in reading. And then I got to, I just gave up because I wasn't getting anywhere. And then I picked up J.K. Rowling's book. And I was like, oh, this is why I like reading again. Yeah. So I'm going to write something like that. And I just took all that I learned and just kind of like pushed it aside. And I just started writing what I wanted to write the way I wanted to write it. And that's what you have sitting next to you.
That's amazing about writing a sequel to Lord of the Rings. Me and my brother did storyboards via Polaroid with our sequel to Return of the Jedi when we were kids. So, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Who would you say is your favorite currently writing author right now? Like, they got a new book out, you got to go get it because you got to read it.
Oh, wow. That's a hard one. The books that I have read recently that I've really enjoyed, I liked Circe, Madeline Stowe, I think his name is. Not sure. I also like The Martian. You can say these are actually dated from a few years because I tend to read slowly. I don't read that. Most of what I read is nonfiction, for the main reason that I can steal from them. Because, I mean, real life, you can steal from. So I have ideas, and so a lot of the stuff I do read, it is nonfiction. I remember reading The Swerve not too long ago in preparation for writing Legends of the First Empire, because that actually has, and for the Rise and Fall, which is the new series I'm writing, because I don't know if you know anything about The Swerve, but it's a historical recounting of how they were, when the Roman Empire fell and the Roman Catholic Church took over Europe, they suppressed literature that didn't support the church. And at some point, this monk or this priest starts looking for this ancient books. And it used to go into different, monasteries looking, because that's the only place they had them. And so it was surreptitiously sneak in, because even the monks weren't allowed to read the books. They had to copy them without reading them, because they thought it would be too subversive, but they wanted to keep copying them. So it became this really kind of cool archaeological Indiana Jones for people who were going into monasteries. And that was very inspirational for me, as I found a lot of neat ideas out of there. So that's the kind of things that I read in order to help me write. But as far as fiction writers, like I said, I really did enjoy Circe. I really enjoyed The Martian. Ready Player One was a good time. Naomi I enjoyed that. And Naomi Novik's, what is that? It's right behind me here.
Spinning Silver?
Uprooted, yeah. Uprooted was good. Right now I'm reading Stephen King's The Institute, which is a fun one too. I enjoyed that.
But Bill Bryson.
Oh, Bill Bryson, but again, it's nonfiction. Bill Bryson does a great job for the nonfiction stuff.
Not that there's anything wrong with it, but do you have any plans to write anything outside of the Riyria universe eventually?
Oh, I always have plans. There is what I want to do, and then there's what my wife wants me to do. I had never had any further intentions of writing within Elan post Percepticus. When I finished the series that you're reading right now, I wasn't planning on writing another word in Elan. However, my wife apparently fell in love with Hadrian, and she did not like the fact that I was standing between her and her lover. So I was pushed into writing the Chronicles. And then I needed to write another series, and I realized that I had lied all the way through the Revelations knowingly about the history of the Revelations, all the stuff that you know about that backstory, about the mythology of the gods and how the empire was made. It's all wrong. It's all lies. And it was intentionally done that way, and it has caused a lot of trouble. So I wanted to go back and tell the real story so you understand how the process works, which is how Legends of the First Empire got built.
Here's the most frequent question I get whenever I talk about your books on my channel, and I know that you get it way more. What reading order do you suggest people read these books in? Because I always tell them publication order. They're like, can I read them chronologically? I'm like, from what I've been told, there's spoilers if you do it that way. So
there's
what
spoilers either way. Okay, so personally, I would read them in publication order. And the reason I would do that is because that's the way I wrote them. So the stories are building in the same way that I, as the author, built them. So if you know what I wrote, that you'll have the same mindset, because I write in order. I don't write out of order. So if you're following that, you'll see that I'm purposely putting in Easter eggs for stuff that you've already read, which should make it more fun. However, I was well aware of the fact that in the future, most people will probably begin with Age of Myth and read in chronological order once they're all done. It will make one long story. So they are designed so they can be read both ways. Now, there are spoilers if you read it from chronological. There are spoilers if you read it the other way. Go ahead. She's jumping in here.
I'm going to interject in here. I wouldn't necessarily say it's spoilers as much as you learn things in different ways. And from the letters we've gotten, because I happen to read a lot of letters, no matter which order people read in, they say this was the best order. Yeah. And they do that. But it's not really a spoiler. It's just that you find out things in different orders. So sometimes you know things that the characters don't know. And then sometimes it's different. It's a different experience when you go into a different order, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, in many ways, it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's a different experience, but both will work.
Yes.
And for people who read it in chronological order, they probably can't imagine it any other way, because they don't see anything as a spoiler because it makes sense. If you read it the other way, there are certain things that are surprising if you read it in Revelations that won't be surprising if you read it the other way, but then there will be things that surprise you otherwise. So it can be done either way.
Have you been approached, and I'm sure you've been approached at this point at least, for adaptation rights for TV or film for any of this stuff yet?
Yeah. In fact, at the moment, the Revelations, Chronicles, and the Age books are all under contract because of the fact that we signed a contract with them a while ago. They're not keeping up with the contract requirements. So, I mean, they're kind of in breach at this point, but we don't care because I was not happy with what I saw. And as a result of that, I would much rather not have the books be made into a movie rather than seeing them be made into something awful or something that I certainly don't like. So as a result of that, that's the thing. Everyone always writes to me and they say, oh, why don't you make this into a movie? I'm like, because I don't own a movie studio. I don't have that ability. So, yeah, I mean, I would love to be able to, have, Steven Spielberg step up and take over, or, Cameron step up and take this job and do it. But, they're not knocking on my door. So all the people who want this made into a movie, you have to go out and lobby your Hollywood, producers and institutions to get them to actually produce it, because they're not seeing it yet.
Yeah, some of the series I've watched recently on Netflix, I was like, this would be great. Like a 6-season show on Netflix would be just like awesome. So that's my hope someday. So maybe if you get those rights back, with the success that they're having with Shadow and Bone, what they have with The Witcher, maybe something like that down the road. But
it would be nice. But I keep thinking, Tolkien wrote his in the 30s and 40s and 50s, and he wasn't even. I mean, he sold okay, but he wasn't even really popular until he got the paperback out in the 60s. And now it's been nearly 100 years that he's finally getting recognized. So it's like, yeah, okay. If I have to wait that long, I'm in trouble.
Will you ever write past the Revelations timeline, maybe about two certain characters?
I've always said no to this because of the fact that you have yet to find out, but that series ends very well, and I worked very hard to have a very good and completely and totally satisfying ending. So I see no reason to keep pushing forward for fear of jumping the shark. And I assume you know what that means.
I do.
Okay.
I watched Happy Days.
Okay. So I didn't want to do that because if you read the stories, there's 6 books in that series that you're talking about. In each book, the stakes get higher, and the drama gets deeper, and the problem gets more dramatic each book. So I kept topping myself with each book until finally you get to the last one, and all the stops are pulled out, and it's just a full-on blast because nothing could be more at stake. There could be no more dramatic, no more difficult way to solve the problem, and so I couldn't possibly top that. But in retrospect, I'm thinking that there might be a way, but it would require me writing the entire history of the world up to that point. And in doing so, I could lay the groundwork for something in the future. But probably it wouldn't be another sequel following with Royce and Hadrian. If it did, it would be far in the future when they're rather quite old. But more than likely, it would actually be post their lifetimes. So you would have an idea of what they did, you would hear about it, and you would have an understanding of what passed, but you wouldn't actually see them on another adventure together, because that would be unlikely. Because I put these guys through so much hell, there's really no reason to dig their bodies up and beat them again.
Yeah, I think Robert Downey Jr. was doing an interview with Joe Rogan recently, and he was saying, hey, there's time travel now, so that means Iron Man can come back. And he was saying, if I put that jersey back on, wouldn't you feel cheated, though? Wouldn't you feel like that just kind of took all the gravitas away from, how it ended? So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Graphic audio. Now, graphic audio has all of Legends of the Empire and Riyria Revelations. Will that relationship continue with graphic audio? I guess with your other series.
So we have a lot of contracts, and I can't keep track of them all. Right. I'm not sure if they have. I'm not sure if they have signed on for Chronicles yet or not. It could be that they just haven't gotten around to producing them because they're just finishing up with Riyria Revelations. An interesting thing about that. So with audio rights, there are dramatic audio rights and non-dramatic audio rights. Mm-hmm. And when we sold the rights to Orbit, they took the non-dramatic audio rights. And then years later, we kept the audio rights for the Legends books. So when Graphic Audio came to us and they wanted to buy some books, they bought the Legends series. And we were actually going to there for they were doing an interview, an in-studio interview with us. And right before going there, I looked up my contract just so that I knew like what where things were. And at the end of the day, I said, I'm really surprised you guys haven't asked for the audio rights for Riyria, because Riyria is, very popular. And they said, oh, we wanted the audio rights, the dramatic audio rights for that, but we were told they're not available. And I'm like, well, who told you that? And they said, well, your agent. And I was like, I just read my contract before coming over here. We absolutely have the rights for it. So I said, send me a contract, and we had a contract immediately. And then of course I called the agent. I'm like, what the hell are you doing? And they said, well, you know, you have this contract with Orbit. And I said, yes. And I read my contract with Orbit, and they only get the dramatic, the non-dramatic audio rights. They said, yes, but there's also this little thing in here about a non-compete clause. And in the non-compete clause, you're not able to sell, you know, the word for word of the book, you know, elsewhere. And I'm like, yes, I can. I mean, that doesn't mean that they didn't take the dramatic audio rights. So anyways, anyone who knows me knows that non-compete clauses are something that just infuriate me. And I would like nothing more, because I watch my non-compete very carefully. And I would like nothing more than for someone to challenge me on a non-compete, and I would like to take them to court and break their backs. So when my agent said, well, we're pretty sure that Orbit would say that it would be a non-compete issue. And I was like, bring it. You know, like nothing would give me more pleasure than for them to say I can't sell the graphic audio rights because of a non-compete clause. And the agent wouldn't even, like I said, they wouldn't even offer it because they didn't want to, you know, they didn't want to get involved in something that might be, you know, like a fight. So the one thing I did do before, you know, like getting too excited is I wrote to Orbit and I said, you know, I want a letter from you saying that we own the dramatic audio rights and we can sell them. And if they had come back with, no, you don't, then the race was on and I would be jumping at a chance to take them to court. Unfortunately, they came back and they said, of course, here's your letter. And I was like, oh, I was bummed. So that's a long way of saying, for a while, those rights were not being exercised, not because we didn't want to sell them, but because our agent was kind of screwing up and said they couldn't be sold. But anyways, I think Graphic Audio now has purchased everything that you own. And they take a long time because they have many actors and they got the sound effects. I mean, they take longer to produce than the non-graphic audio. So I can't remember if they have Chronicles as well. I'd have to actually go back and look. If they don't, they'll probably come knocking for them because, you know, they've been very happy with them.
Outstanding. Yeah, people seem to love those. Like I said, the audio stuff's like not me, but a lot of people these days audio way more than they actually read. So it's a big market, I'm sure that you know.
It is the market as far as the publishers are
we
concerned.
consider it to be the new ebook.
Yeah. A couple more here for you, because if Royce, I love this question. If Royce could join the Fellowship of the Ring, who would he kill first?
I don't know why Royce gets such a bad rap. He's a nice guy.
I just read the line about when I lose somebody, people console me, but when Royce loses somebody, towns evacuate. And I read that like 6 times and just could not stop laughing.
Well, it would definitely depend on who offended him first. As we well know, he does take a fondness to certain individuals who treat him well, but those who don't, and he doesn't like pretentiousness too much. So yeah, he would have problems with maybe a few, but not too many.
So what can you share about Nolan coming out in August? Is it August it's coming out?
August 3rd.
August 3rd, yeah. Well, I'll tell you the end of the story. So
cool. Skip to the end. My TBR just got shorter.
Okay, so I'll speak to you because there may be other people watching who are in your same boat. So after you get done with those 3 books on your desk, including if you want to go and read the Chronicles, which are underneath them, then you want to go back and read the true story of how it all happened, which is what I call the age books, or as Legends of the First Empire. Now, this is where I go back and show how, you know, the empire was made. But I'm going back and I'm really kind of showing how mankind kind of grew out of the roots of a very primitive culture and how they, you know, discovered a lot of the abilities like, you know, forging steel and even using currency and horses and things of that nature, bows and arrows, that whole kind of thing. So in addition to that, you also see how the first empire was made and the whole legend of Nephron and all that stuff that you should already know from the first books.
The lie.
What's that?
The lie.
Oh, the lie, yes. So then when I finished that series, it ends essentially, well, I'm not going to tell you how it ends, but it's not,
Empire's formed.
well, that's why I didn't want to go that far, see? That's just, I think, a spoiler. So there's a huge gap between the end of that series, because it takes place 3,000 years prior to the series you're reading. And there's literally, I don't know, probably about a little over close to 3,000 years in between. So when I finished that, you see how the foundation of everything is done. And then, of course, you read the books you'd have now, which would be like the Middle Age period. So you have the Bronze Age, you have the Middle Ages, but you have missing kind of like that middle Roman period and the Dark Ages. You haven't really seen those yet. So I decided to fill that gap. And so I created a series called The Rise and Fall. Now, normally when I do a series, they obviously blow up to being rather large 6-book things. This time I wanted to keep that trimmed down. So what I intended to do is kind of borrow a system from Isaac Asimov's Foundation. And what I was going to do is I was going to have just 3 books, but the span of time between those books was going to be impressive, such that none of the characters really, well, very few of the characters that you see in one book will appear in the next book, because it would have been, you know, as many hundreds, possibly well, not 1,000, but hundreds of years between them. So, but in doing so, you'll see how each specific group changed history. And then the next book will show you the effects of what the previous people did, and so on and so forth. So you see over the span of time how history and the civilization grew through the eyes of these very significant characters. And there would be Nolan, Fairlane, and Esarhaddon, who you would know from the last book.
That's what has my interest piqued. Yes.
Yeah. Fairlane actually appears in both series. She's mentioned in both the series you have and the previous one, and yet I don't think anyone remembers her. So if you run across that name, you'll know who that person is. But she has a book herself. And so there's Nolan, who, if you've read the Legends of the First Empire, you know who he is. I'm not saying who he is. I'm saying you will know who he is if you've read that series. And then Fairlane has been mentioned, but only vaguely. And then, of course, everyone usually knows who Esarhaddon is. And it connects, is the connecting tissue between the first series and the last, and the Riyria Revelation. Now, there is a gap, which I may or may not ever cover, which is the post-fall of the Empire, which everyone should already know about. And kind of like the Middle Age period of the Dark Ages. And but I don't know if I'll ever touch that, because it's not that significant of a point. But yeah, so Nolan is the first of the 3-book trilogy that links the 2 series.
Now I got a collector question for you here. Now, this isn't just me. This is a lot of people who like their books to match, because there are a lot of people who have been posting pictures about how they've gotten like some from your website and they've gotten some from Orbit and the sizes don't match. They want to know is, I know that all of Legends of the First Empire is now on mass market. Is, will there ever be a release of just standard paperbacks so they match the same size as all of these do? That's their biggest question.
I'm gonna let her do this one, because she's the one who does this.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you're dealing. So there's a couple things related to sizes. First, you have the U.S. versus the UK. Okay, there are definitely different sizes in those. What we have always done is we follow the rule of the publisher. So when Orbit obviously did everything in trade paperback, they did all the Riyria Revelations, then they did the first 2 of the Chronicles. So we did our 2 versions of the Chronicles in the same size that Orbit did, but it's the Orbit US versions. So people who are overseas, they do have problems because their books are shorter. But there's really nothing we can do about that, because you know, although we do a print run, we don't have a big distribution arm outside of the United States. So it's not like I can do a print run for the US and then do a print run for the UK with a slightly different size, like what Orbit did.
I understand.
And that's because we don't have a distribution partner in the UK, and I haven't been able to get one. Now with Del Rey, they did the first 3 books of the series, again, hardcovers, and they went with mass market paperbacks. And so we, again, copied them so that, you know, all the paperbacks are all the same size, Now, the little ones, they're the mass market because that's what the publisher chose.
Mm.
If we were to have put out the last 3 books in that series, you know, in kind of the size of the Riyria books, then it would be really weird, right? Because
Yeah,
they'd have 3
definitely.
little ones and then 3 big ones. But we have no ability to force a publisher to publish in a certain size. I mean, that's just not something that we get control over. Now, one of the reasons why we left Orbit and went to Del Rey, which Mike probably already mentioned, is because we wanted hardcovers, and Orbit just wouldn't do hardcovers. So the biggest problem is that, you know, we don't own the rights to those other books, and so we can't produce them. I mean, it's just not possible. And my daughter one day came over here, and because someone was asking about it and something, and she says, well, you know, how long do these publishers have that right? And I'm like, well, until 70 years after Michael dies. You know, that's a long time for them to have the right. So, you know, all we can do is, now with Nolan, obviously we can do whatever we want, right? I mean, the new series, The Rise and Fall, it's the first time in almost, well, since 2008. It's the first time we've been in control of an entire series. Okay. So we can do whatever we want there. Like, you know, one of the things we're doing is we're doing a limited edition faux leather copy with hubbed spines, which hub spines are really expensive. So we have a limited edition version, we have the hardcover version, and then we'll have a trade paperback size. We won't be doing those in mass market. We'll be doing those in trade paperback. So yeah, now there is one other little thing that's going to be brought up with size, and I'm sure this is going to drive people crazy. And I specifically did a design on Nolan so that this wouldn't be a problem. But if you look at the books in the Riyria Chronicles, 95%, 96% of those books all line up exactly perfectly. Except if you recently got into the Chronicles, you may have a trade paperback of the Death of Dulgath that's a little bit taller than everything else, like an eighth of an inch.
That's the picture
taller.
I keep getting seen on the Discord. Yeah.
Yes. Well, so here's the deal. And the reason for that is when we ran out of that press run, we were not selling enough copies to do another press run. Okay. So we had to switch to print on demand, and print on demand does their books 6x9, but Orbit did their books a little bit shorter than they're like 5 7/8 or something like that. But there is hope for this because I hope I hope I can say this, and I hope you're not going to disagree with me. But we do have another chronicle that is going to be worked on, which is called Drumendor, which we will have control over. And what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to do a box set for it. So that requires me to do a new press run for Dulgath, right? So there will be, you know, 1,000, maybe 2,000 books that are printed up that are back to the non-print on demand size. So they won't be that little eighth of an inch above. But right at this moment, you know, that's just the way it is. Now for Nolan, for instance, I resized Nolan to be 6x9 so that if it runs out of its press run and it switches over to print on demand, it will match. In other words, the print on demand size will be the same size as the press run size, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah, I know it's annoying as heck.
Just get the ebook. And
No. See, now if I want to get just Chronicles #5, will I be able to get it to match these 4 that I already have?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
great.
Absolutely.
Great.
Yeah. And if you like, if it really drove you crazy, like absolutely drove you crazy that you got one of the higher versions of Chronicles, I will make available to you that other one, and I'll sell it to you at cost.
Okay. I'll let them know. They'll be overjoyed to hear that. As for Legends of the First Empire, I think I'll just continue to save my nickels and dimes and splurge on that hardcover set that you sell on your website. But
Yes.
right now, my wife would probably kick me out if I did that. So,
well, she wouldn't if you let her read it.
Yeah, well, I tried. I mean, I just now got her to read Kings of the Wild. I've been by Nicholas Eames. I've been bugging her to read that for like a year. One last question. I think this is a great one to end on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Well, I was just gonna say, the one thing about the Legends of the First Empire box set, and I'm just gonna do the shout out because I'm a very picky person, and I usually find fault with things. But the manufacturer we picked to do the box set, they just did a fabulous job. Like their box it's beautiful. It's thick. It's strong, sturdy. I mean, because I have a lot of slip cases, and I got a lot of I actually had a lot of slip cases made up by different manufacturers, and there were cheaper ones out there. But I'm so impressed with them. In fact, I got Dirk to use them. I'm getting everyone to use that company. I mean, they just
Brian McClellan. You get
Brian McClellan is going to be using them.
A lot of people using this.
It's really worth it. I mean, I know that slip cases are expensive, and and especially that one is very expensive because it holds 6 books. Like a single slip case for a single book. What we did is we set our pricing the same pricing that Sean Speakman does, which is $35 for a protective slipcase. Now, because ours is so wide, ours is even more expensive to produce, but we still kept the price at $35. So it's very nice. It's very well done.
Well, I definitely want it. So.
Well, but here's the other thing. We do put those on sale from time to time. Like if you want to wait till Christmas time, and they will go on sale, and you can save some money.
Or better yet, buy it now and then buy 2 more at Christmas.
I think the perfect question here is the best way to end this here, and it has to deal with an ending. And it is just saying, we're not asking you to give us a for certain thing here, but do you have an ending for the overall series in your head? Do you know how you want to end things?
Yeah, it's at the end of Persepolis. That's how it ends.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, no, I'm not willing to say anything, quite frankly, on that part. Even she doesn't know anything, so... I mean,
no, but is he talking about?
He's talking about.
Is he talking about
like when you're just done with the universe completely?
He's talking about the entire, the Avengers completion, apparently.
Endgame.
Yeah, no, I get ideas from time to time, but whether I'll actually see, the problem is I figure I've only got so long to live, and I won't be able to write all the books, so I don't want to get halfway through and then die. That would be awful. People wouldn't like that. So I have to. I'm not even sure I'll get through all 12 of the Chronicles. Actually, it's only 10. But, I mean, a lot of people want to have all of those, one for every year, but I'm not sure I'll get through all of those because there's obviously quite a few. And there's other things, as you mentioned earlier, I like to try things outside a lot. I've only done one so far that's been published, and that was Hollow World. That was the only one that's I've done outside. And I would love to try other things because when you're dealing with the same fantasy world, you can't do a lot of things that you can do with the real world. You can't use common knowledge to relate to people. You have to use things you've only created, and you can't use that fun association that you can if you're actually talking about the real world. So the way it ended was really good. People should be satisfied with that unless I do something other than that.
Well, if you don't mind, I'll be emailing you probably here in a couple of days when I finish Persepolis and telling you how much I probably will agree. But I want to thank you both for doing this. As a business and marketing major, I really appreciate getting this kind of peek behind the curtain of the business aspect of this, because that's stuff that I talk about in the channel, and people, their eyes just kind of glaze over because I love talking about data trends and things like that. But yeah, I love hearing stuff like this.
He's the number person. So I went to an agent one time, and they were very impressed with one of the agents. The publisher was very impressed with one of the agents because he had all his numbers. He was a big numbers guy. I said, "Oh, you're going to love my wife," because she comes in with all this background information broken down into spreadsheets. Oh my gosh, she knows everything.
No, it's nice.
This is why I have to pull it around when numbers come up.
Well, I don't have anything else. You guys have any like big announcements? Anything you want to drop that no one knows about? I mean, besides Chronicles #5, you just mentioned there, but
no, not really. I haven't started that. I mean, I kind of started it. The bad thing was I mentioned it to my wife that if I did the next Riyria Revelations Chronicle, it would be Drummondor. And she's like, "Oh, so you're writing Drummondor?" And she immediately went off of that, and she assumed that I was like in the process of writing. I'm like, "Well, I have to finish this series before I do anything."
have you? Did you Kickstarter the entire new trilogy, or are you doing each one of those individually?
Each one individually.
Do you have planned dates for those, or target dates, or anything?
Yeah.
Yet? Yeah.
Date girl.
Yeah. So, Legends of the First Empire. Okay, the first 3 books were done by Del Rey, and the last 3 books were done by us. And it's really interesting because Mike came up with this really great idea as he was writing Legends, and it's almost like 2 very closely related trilogies more than a 6-book series. Because
about the Rise and Fall.
No, I'm talking about Legends.
Oh,
because 4, 5, and 6. You kind of go,
right. I'm
going to go somewhere completely different. Okay. So what happened with 4, 5, and 6, which were our books, they are the first time that things kind of end on cliffhangers. And because they kind of ended on cliffhangers, it was very, very important for me for there to be a very small window between those books. I did not want to have people waiting a long time. So all 3 of those books were released within 4 months, and it damn near killed me. Putting out three books that quickly was very, 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 very hard, and it broke the Rob, and I was like, never again. So now when he started doing the new series, The Rise and Fall, from day one, I was like, they're going to come out every summer, one a year, every summer.
Mm-hmm.
And that way I won't get myself into any type of trouble with it. And these are definitely not even close to cliffhangers. I mean, they're almost like standalone novels in a lot of respects. So yes, we already have our release dates for those. We already have press time scheduled for those. We already have the narrator scheduled for those. We even have the copy editors penciled in for those. So the Kickstarters will always run in February. The idea is to get one of the perks of being in the Kickstarter is the people get the books months and months before they hit the retail release. So like the people for Nolan got the ebook on May 2nd, and they will get the hardcovers literally days after they come off the press, which will still be before August. I'm figuring we'll be shipping those in like mid-June. So yeah, so every Kickstarter will be in February. The ebooks, and usually when we go into the Kickstarter, we've already been through alpha, we've been through beta. We're just getting the books off to the copy editors. So I mean, it's like 99% there. And then the did she get in camera?
Yeah.
And so anyways, yeah, every February will be the Kickstarters for those. And then for the third book, for that Kickstarter, we will also include a slipcase for all 3. And people are asking like, well, why can't I get a slipcase now? And it's like, well, if I did that, you'd have to spend, 35 times 3, where if I do it at the end, you only have to spend 35 times 1. So it's actually better for the reader if there's only one slipcase as opposed to each individual one.
No, that's great, because a lot of times I'll buy like book 1, book 2, and then book 3 comes out in a complete set with a nice slipcase. I'm like, well, I got to buy books 1 and 2 again now. Damn it,
Yeah.
So that's pretty nice. It's pretty nice. All right, well, I don't have anything else. Do you guys have anything else?
No, we're good.
I really, really appreciate this, and like I said, I look forward to finishing this up. Already theorizing some things, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be wrong, but I can't wait to discuss those. Maybe after you guys release, we can get together. Maybe we can have like some spoiler talk or something like that. I think that might be a little bit of fun.
That'd be fun.
All right. Well, have a great night. Have a great release. I'm sure it's very stressful. I think what she talked about there is why I was assuming that you wrote 2 books a year. I think that maybe that's where I got that from, because it seemed like every time I talked on Discord, someone was like, "Yeah, that new book just came out." Like, what? The other one just came out like 3 months ago.
Has the idea of she wanted the books to come out faster because, and certainly when I was self-publishing, that you wanted to have it like every, I don't know, 4 to 6 months was the sweet spot for.
We always did
keeping
April
things
and
up.
October.
Right,
April, October.
and that's because they're already written, so she was just releasing them. But now, as I put them out, it takes longer to get the editing done, and then they want to set it up for promotions, and that does take time. Because now I'm running it through a lot more laundering, where we have beta people, and then we have gamma people, and we have editors, and so it takes a long time to get the thing up to being the best it possibly can be.
That's awesome.
A lot of it is, you know, and it's funny because most self-published authors publish much quicker than we do. But we kind of self-publish, but as in the same realm that traditional publishers do. And, you know, what people forget is that, you know, there's other people that are involved, you know, and like Tim, we have to book him years in advance. Like Mike was saying to me one time, like when I was getting close up to a deadline, he's like, well, just push back the release. And I'm like, I can't. I have literally scheduled press time. In fact, in the days of COVID, which is, you know, we're still in, you know, we've printed 3 books during the time of COVID. And that was because I had press time scheduled 8 months before COVID happened. There were a lot of books by major publishers that did not hit the street when they were supposed to, because they literally could not get any press run time. Because we had already locked in our press dates. So if I missed a date, I literally would lose a year. Like I could not get the book out sooner than a year, because if I missed my press date, I would go to the bottom of the queue, and there was a year's worth of people, you know, of printing already, you know, already done up. So I can't miss my dates. I have to hit them.
Well, sir, it sounds like you're very fortunate to be in good hands. She sounds like she's really taking care of stuff, and she just tells you get back there and write, huh? It's like Annie in Misery telling you to write.
Well,
get in there and write.
Well, but the other thing is because he's always writing the complete series first.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
he literally has books. You know, it's funny because like when a book comes out, everyone's excited, but like we've been done with it for 2 years.
Yeah.
You know, like we've written many books since then.
Yeah, people will say, "Oh, I love that part." I'm like, could you refresh my memory? Because it's been a while.
Yeah. I couldn't do that unless, you know, I'm now starting to eat up his cushion, but you know, for years he was like 5 books ahead of me. So, you know, it makes me the bottleneck, not him.
The choke point, yeah.
Well, I think I heard you say it one time, so I think it's something I'm going to say back to you. As long as you keep writing them, I will keep reading them. So I'm going to look forward to catching up. So maybe that you'll keep that cushion with me. I don't know, but after I'm doing so many big, huge series right now. That's kind of what slowed me down. But like I said, always kind of comfort reads for me. But I'm pretty sure it sounds to me like Legends will be something that I kind of just fly through really quick.
Okay.
That's the plans. Well, thank you guys. Have yourselves a great night and enjoy your release party. I'm sure it should be a lot of fun, right? Nothing new at this point. No party anymore. Just like, hey, another book out. All right. Well, thanks, guys. Have a great night.
All right. Bye-bye. Thanks.